after some gremlins in the system, we are finally recording. Have you gents seen this massive spat going on between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and Ben Shapiro? And yes, in many ways you can say it's a distraction, but there's something really interesting happening there. It's showing some huge type of division that's occurring within the American sort of political spectrum. Or is it just theatre?
It could be a tough 59 minutes from here, because
I haven't seen
that's
it.
the first I've heard of it. But give a bit more detail. Okay. No, I didn't know about that. Go on then.
Oh, okay. Well, basically, what basically Tucker had Nick on his show, and Tucker launched into Christian Zionists and how they are very, very badly influencing American foreign policy in the Middle East. Now, this is something that we've touched on a few times in the past, and I think we'll probably touch on this many times in the future because it's an ongoing talking point. But as a result, there's been a huge pushback now against Tucker and Nick trying to cancel them. And Ben Shapiro had a huge hissy fit this week where he put out a video saying no to Tucker, no to Nick. Israel first means America first kind of thing. This is very, very worrying rhetoric.
I don't think the rhetoric is the important thing here. I think the important thing to consider is that what we're seeing from the so-called right, and I absolutely say the so-called right, is exactly the same behavior that we saw from the so-called left, cancel culture. And this is the important thing. You're saying something I don't like, so I have to shut you up. And this is what this absolutely demonstrates is that people are just people, and it doesn't matter whether you're right or left. If somebody's saying something to you that you don't think is correct, at a smaller level, we get this all the time. You said something I don't agree with, so I'm cancelling my membership.
Yes.
This happens all the time, and it is really in one sense hypocritical. Because many of those people are the type of people that would have stood up and said, I have the right to say whatever I like. I stand for freedom of speech, but only if it's speech that I agree with. It seems to be the attitude of people. And so I think this is indicative of this feature within, or this trait that humanity has. We don't like hearing things that we don't agree with. And our first response to it is to shut it up. The correct response is to listen and to consider. And we may end up coming to the conclusions that we originally had. But if we're simply living or wanting to live in echo chambers, what is the point?
But some of these talking points seem to be very much more emotional than others for some reason. It's an interesting psychological observation. If we were to talk about what's going on in Sudan, we could disagree and then go have a beer and nobody cares. But
I think, first of all, I think it's a disgrace that nobody cares, and it is. You're absolutely right. That is the case. There are conflicts. I mean, Sudan is quite possibly the worst conflict that we have seen at any point in modern history,
but nobody cares.
Whether it's because it's black faces or whatever, nobody cares. I don't know what the reason is that nobody cares. Perhaps nobody cares because the media isn't talking about the conflict, and therefore they're not being told to care. I don't know what it is, but that does concern me that we have an absolute humanitarian disaster going on there and nobody gives a damn, and that is also problematic. But you're right. What we're facing here is religion, actually, because we're facing Christian Zionism. We're facing an ideology that people have that the second coming of Christ can be accelerated by making certain things happen in the Middle East. And again, they're looking for the hero to come and save them. Trump was a hero that was going to come and save them. And this is just another aspect of the same type of thing. So for some people it's China, for some people it's Putin, for some people it's I don't know what it is, but the point is that because it reaches deep into their souls, and they're looking for some kind of spiritual aspect to it or whatever it is. They've actually got the wrong end of the stick there, but because it's quite so deeply ideological, then they react extremely violently in some cases.
Yeah, you just said ideological. I think that's the tail on the donkey right there. It's ideological, and that goes beyond sort of rational thinking or sort of logical thinking. Although I must be careful now, because it's always the other person, right, who's ideological. It's always the other person who isn't logical. So we have to also hold up the mirror ourselves, as we've many times said.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think on the religion side of things, I think I'd be sort of slightly more specific in saying that not necessarily religion. It is a religion. And I know that sounds like I'm splitting hairs slightly, but this very particular issue with it's not the Middle East, because the vast majority of people have no real comprehension of where the Middle East even begins and ends, let alone what all the various situations that sort of make up the confusion in it are, but specifically where Israel is concerned, I think there has become a religion which really, as far as I'm aware, did not exist until relatively recently in this country. The idea that people would become sort of Christian, what we would describe as being Christian Zionists almost by default, and there are, there is a sort of Venn diagram of overlap with several other things. I think, to go back to what you were saying initially, the suggestion that that Christian Zionism influences American policy on the Middle East rather than just is the policy on the Middle East is an odd distinction to make. I mean, I don't know why they'd be pussyfooting around that. It's very, very obvious, and it goes back for, I think, as long as the Americans consider that they've been involved in that region. But I think people here, certainly in the UK, who've taken this on and found themselves kind of in that camp, for want of a better phrase, is curious, curious as much as it is very dangerous. And the fact that people are so incredibly emotionally invested in it in the way that they aren't in, it's not just Sudan, frankly, anything else that's going on in the world. There was sort of, at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, there was a very contrived outpouring of emotion about Ukrainians because we were told, oh, well, they're so like us, they're so close, and we'll be next. Those were the three things from that, and therefore there was a sort of an emotional response. But it's absolutely not the same as what is happening or the way people are sort of projecting into the Middle East, specifically the Israel situation. Funnily enough, on Wednesday's news programme of this week, I looked at an interview that had taken place with Yossi Cohen, the former Mossad chap, which in itself is, I mean, we could talk about that for quite some time, but we won't. The reason I wanted to look at it was partly because of what he said, but also partly because he was being interviewed by one of the guys there's ex-army chap called Andrew Fox, who absolutely, I would say, encapsulates what it is you're talking about. Now, I don't know him. I don't know where his ideas, as we might describe them, have come from, but there's absolutely no doubt that his primary role in life at the moment seems to be to promote the basically any cause that Israel has. And the reason this is concerning is because he is admittedly now ex-army, but he has, in his capacity as a civilian, been back to the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, where officer cadets are trained. and he has been instructing them in behavioral science. And he has very, very strong views on the situation at hand. And I think I really do think that is a concern. Okay, it's a microcosm, and I'm just pulling one individual out. But what I'm getting to is that he subscribes to a religion. Now, I have no idea if he considers that he does have a strong Christian faith, but he has absolutely taken on this mantle of, he must do all he can to protect Israel, the state of Israel, and everything that's associated with it. It is very strange to me, but also I think it's very, very dangerous. And there's a total lack of objectivity about it. And he thinks that he holds the right position because he has been led around Gaza by the IDF, and he's been told that this, that, and the other was done, with surgical precision, and there's been no targeting of civilians and all the rest of it. And he describes the situation completely the other way around from how certainly the UK column editorial line has been, which is that, the genocide is working the other way around and all the rest of it. But as I say, that is the religion. And so people like Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes and Ben Shapiro, they will have their groups of followers who I dare say will only have had their own point of view completely reinforced by whatever's happening at the minute.
But then how do you navigate this whole thing? I mean, because you end up looking like that self-important, arrogant, sort of hubris-filled individual when you go, guys, you're all wrong.
No. I think you've got to ask questions. I mean, for example, one of the questions that I think people should be asking is, how did it happen that if you go back 20 years, the right, the far right, were completely anti-Jewish, anti-Israel? How did it happen that ideology has rotated 180 degrees to being absolutely pro-Jewish and pro-Israel? How did that happen? That's the first thing you do.
It can't be organic.
And precisely. And then you have to ask, how is it? And I realize this one is a particularly tough one for many, many people, but you have to ask, how is it that we have all been taught to be so fearful of Islam when extreme Islam and violent extreme Islam is a creation of the West, of our own governments? So how is it that we have been taught that all Islam is something to be feared? So, we've got to start learning a little bit of our history and how the Muslim Brotherhood was created, how Wahhabism was created, Takfiri, whatever you want to call it, how Al-Qaeda and ISIS were created. And we've got to actually consider the stories that we were told about Al-Qaeda being the reason that we went into Afghanistan and Al-Qaeda being the reason that we went into Iraq. And we've got to then put that side by side with the fact that we have been funding and arming Al-Qaeda from the beginning. So, at that point, we've got to start questioning, what are we being told? Who's telling us it? And we should be coming to some conclusions, actually, because there is no doubt that we are being played. And as you say, it is not an organic process that something which is was so ideologically determined that Judaism and Israel were an enemy of the planet, because that was what Hitler believed, that they have done 180 degree in a very short time. That is not something that's happened by accident. So you could say that is the power of the Jewish lobby or the Zionist lobby, or you could say that actually there's a bigger deep state operation going on. And when we have been talking about at the UK column, and Charles has just referred to it again, we have been talking about the use of applied psychology, the use of behavioral sciences. This is quite an advanced, quite a mature technology now, and to the point that governments and intelligence agencies and the deep state pretty much know how to play populations and get a result. And we've got to start questioning our own. It's not about me or Charles or you telling anybody we're right and you're wrong. It's a question of encouraging people to actually question their own ideas and their own positions, because that's what we've got to be doing. We've just got to be doing that first and foremost.
But whoever's doing the playing is doing a very good job. I don't know if you saw what the pushback or the response to New York's new mayor has been. It's remarkable, just looking at this chaos unfold. Now suddenly everything is about 9/11 again being an Islamic attack. It's like we've gone back to 2001. I thought that we had put that talking point to bed. And now suddenly...
No, we didn't put that talking point to bed because what they did straight away was they got right in there and created a division within the so-called 9/11 truth movement. So because they split that campaign between the controlled demolition and the Judy Wood crowd, because they split that and got them fighting each other, which is all they've been doing for the last 25 years, is fighting each other. And they haven't been effective at getting the story out about what actually happened that day. It doesn't matter what the specific mechanism, in my opinion, for the towers coming down was. Everybody agrees that it wasn't the aircraft that did it. So if you can agree on that, focus on that.
Yeah, but now this week, suddenly it's the Muslims again. This is all because of New York's mayor, and so now we're going backwards even more.
Yeah, but I would ask you the question: is that the case, or is that? But look, what was it? Institute of Strategic Dialogue said that they have something like 50,000 influencers on their books. Israel, Netanyahu is now talking about building up huge numbers of influencers that are pro-Israel and so on. What we are seeing in front of us is absolutely an operation to
psyop.
Right? It is a psyop. It is a psyop. And so part of that psyop, of course, is making things appear to be something that they're not. And so what I've noticed over the last couple of years in particular is that there's a lot of vocal people on the social media. There are a lot of bots on social media which amplify some of the narratives that we see on social media, but actually significant numbers of people aren't engaging and don't hold the same view as it might appear. So I think we've just got to be a little bit careful about assuming too much about what people are really thinking, because a lot of the noise that we see isn't real.
That's also true, I suppose. But it is worrying when big names kind of parrot the stuff, because then they influence millions of people.
Potentially, yes, but because that's always been the way, isn't it? It doesn't, the big names used to be in the old days, BBC and CNN. Now the big names are the Tucker Carlsons of the world and the people that are running these huge podcasts on YouTube and other platforms. We've just got to be, discerning, and this, a lot of people, I mean, the establishment has attempted to use this statement against us, but a lot of people are surprised, perhaps by reading the About Us page on the UK column and it's saying very clearly, we expect you to not trust us. This idea of trust is something which has been part and parcel of the censorship / disinformation industrial complex since the beginning of this effort to regulate speech on the internet. And the idea is that you have trusted voices and therefore you can switch your brain off. It's like AI in many ways, because AI is encouraging people to switch their brains off. I was listening to a thing on Radio 4 last night on the way home, I think it was the PM program again. I can't remember, but anyway, they were talking to school children about the use of AI, and they're all using AI. They all recognize that if they are set a task in school for homework or for a test, that if they simply ask the AI to respond to that test, they'll get the right answer. But in the process, they're not internalizing the information, and they're not learning anything actually. But this applies not just in schools and not just with AI. This applies with influencers as well. We trust these people, and then we switch our brains off. And I would say this is exactly the wrong thing to do. So, I don't say that from the point of view that you shouldn't trust the UK column and therefore not support us. If you think we're doing a reasonable job, then please do support us. But don't do it blindly. Don't do it without absolutely challenging every single thing that we say. And that should apply to every person who is commentating or analysing anything in the sort of political or geopolitical space.
Yeah, which I think is why, if you are a big name, you're only there because you're doing a certain amount of parroting. I think you can, Tucker Carlson is a very good example, or Joe Rogan. Stuff gets put out there that appears to be sort of, over a particular line, but most of it's not, and I think that's a critical distinction to make between what they're doing and let's say specifically what UK column is and has been doing. And I think the other thing is the common factor here is the spectre of an enemy. So for Hitler, it was politically expedient to create the Jews as an enemy, just as now in certain countries, this being one of them, to use Islam or the Muslims as the enemy is a very effective political device, because
it's projection.
It is projection, but you've got the sort of seen and the unseen. I mean, it depends what you're wanting to achieve, but obviously with the benefit of using people that actually exist is that they are there and people see them, and stuff. It's easy with the various media tools that are available. It's easier to whip up the sorts of frenzied activity, rhetoric, ideological sort of clinging to a particular belief and everything that we're discussing, if you have actually got a specific and easily identifiable target, which in this case they have, and that is exactly what's been going on for, obviously way more than 25 years, but most obviously in the last 25 years that Muslims are responsible, and that narrative has just crept and crept and crept and crept, and now of course it's used not just, it was initially sort of problems in their country and they need democracy, to then, there's now a risk of terrorism on our shores. And now Israel is at risk because of this. And of course, then there's the migration issue, which sort of wraps a lot of it up together. There are so many ways in which you can use the same enemy, for want of a better word, to cover off particular sort of points on your agenda. But the result is always the same, which is that people are distracted by finding that they are positioned on one side or other of what is drawn as a divide, but it's a fake divide, and yet unfortunately people continue to fall into it, which is exactly what people are doing with this Carlson, Fuentes, Shapiro, whatever exactly it is that they said to each other.
Oh, but Charles, Israel is just defending itself.
Yes, well, and to some people, even after this much time, even the front page of the BBC today is a picture of the part of Gaza City absolutely leveled, and I forget what the sort of headline text actually is, but that is the national broadcaster making it very clear that Israel has destroyed a huge swathe of Palestinian land, and yet there will still be people even listening to this now, because I know that this issue is absolutely not. It doesn't seem to be one with much nuance. I mean, either people do believe that Israel is justified, apparently, to the state of Israel can be justified in absolutely any action that it takes from hereafter. And this is something that's actually very interesting. The interview I referred to with Yossi Cohen, the former Mossad bloke, listening to him talking in such an incredibly glib way about entering into a state of armed conflict. And he gave two scenarios, which were either effectively reactive or proactive. And it was completely amazing listening to him talk, because it was first of all, it was just so banal. I mean, it was like you could have been deciding what you were going to have for dinner, and it was either you were going to cook something or you were going to get someone to cook it for you. And the fact that if there is to be any sort of conflict at all, there will be, significant stages that have been gone through before considering whether you're actually going to go into it. But for him, it was just a given that you would just do this. And this is exactly how he spoke with regard to Lebanon. If they want to go to war with Lebanon, well, that's what they do. And it's absolutely their right. And there doesn't seem to be anything in international humanitarian law or that anyone who either supports or opposes their policy would have any bearing on it. It's completely remarkable. But the problem is that as part of the sort of controlling entity of that state for such a long period of time, he speaks for an awful lot of people who've been conditioned by the same system, and therefore a lot of people who've been influenced from outside. I'm assuming Ben Shapiro for one, but it's amazing, and I think it is of course, like I said earlier, it is extremely dangerous because there is no objective effort to being made to sort of understand it, not just understand it in its own right, but understand what the consequences of it really are, and the fact that the human element, that lives are being lost, is just stripped away. And it's where we go back to the 9/11 thing. Well, X number of people lost their lives, so therefore we can, from now on, just do whatever we want because of that. And it's the same. It's exactly the same way in which the October the 7th sort of casualty toll has been used. I mean, Cohen actually said, yeah, well, there's a menu. If they kill however many of yours, you go and do whatever you do. Peculiar.
This plays into the whole controlled opposition thing, though. I mean, the when you said earlier, Mike, that a lot of this is not organic. If you think about the art of war, it is about putting a seed or a plant or something into what you deem to be the enemy and let them, beat themselves up until they look like a clown show, which is precisely what happened with 9/11. Any opposition to the official narrative looks like a joke now because nobody can agree on anything and we're all just idiots, conspiracy, tinfoil hat wearing, whatever. And it helps reinforce the established narrative. So controlled opposition is a very effective tool. But the problem also that I have found is that now everything and everyone is controlled opposition. And so again, we go around and around and around. And so you end up trusting only yourself because, or not trusting, but you don't believe anything anybody says now about anything because everything is controlled or everything or everyone is a limited hangout. And so it's this constant battle with just critical thinking, I think.
No, I think that's anybody that's hurling the term controlled opposition around. I mean, that's not to say that there isn't any. Of course, there is. We just talked about it. The various funded and so on influencers that are out there, but people that are throwing this term around tend to do so because they are looking for someone that is in complete agreement. I mean, in complete agreement with their own thoughts, and they're looking for someone to reinforce their own positions on things. And this is a problematic place to be, because you're not going to make the right decisions yourself. The only person that you should be even nearly trusting actually is yourself, but only if, as I say, you are prepared to put in the work, because we have people out there that are producing content, that are analyzing events and putting the best job that they can on providing that analysis. Does that mean that we or anybody else is right all the time? No. But the role of the person who's consuming that information should be one of analysis. It should be a creative process in a sense as well, in the sense that you're taking that information. First of all, you shouldn't be just consuming it and switching the program off at the end of the 45 minutes or the hour, whatever it is, and saying, right, that's a done deal. I now know something. Well, no, you don't. You've heard something. And the process of actually processing that should begin at that point. So it's a question of confirming or validating what you've heard, but also actually considering it and seeing how that fits into the picture that you have of the world. And so my view on this is, I don't care if someone's a limited hangout or someone is a controlled opposition. I want to hear what they've got to say. I want to analyze it. I want to come to my own conclusion as to whether what they're saying is correct or not, and not based on some idea that they are somehow trustworthy or that I look up to what they're doing or whatever. It's just information. And so, we should take that information and we should process it ourselves and come to our own conclusions. And we should never be, I've said this so many times, we should never be taking anything we hear on the internet for granted. So if you approach it from that point of view, it doesn't matter whether someone's a limited hangout or controlled opposition at that point, because it's just information.
But I mean, that's the point that I was making on my Substack this week, that if the statement vaccines are harmful, right, now I haven't told you who said that statement, but let's say Bill Gates makes that statement. Okay, no, it wouldn't be Bill Gates, but let's say, I don't know, whatever, right? Trump, okay, says vaccines are harmful, but we know Trump's history is all over the place, right? But it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the statement is still correct, no matter who said it. But the moment you attach something,
correct. Sorry, how did you come to that conclusion?
Oh, I'm projecting my own conclusion onto that statement based on what I have decided and concluded over the years of listening to other people and considering all sorts of things, right? So I'm yet to find just on that, I'm yet to find evidence that any vaccine is either safe or effective. That's the statement, right? So based on that, I can conclude, therefore, that no vaccine is either safe or effective. But now, and we can go into discussion about that, but that's not the point. The point is the statement. It doesn't matter who makes a statement, which is what you're saying. The problem with our modern culture is that people are so hung up on names of people that they play the man and not the ball. And as you rightly pointed out, play the idea, like attack the idea, not the person.
No, I think the problem goes beyond that. Even you have said that and the reason I asked that question is because you said that you have come to the conclusion that vaccines are not safe and that vaccines are not effective. Okay, you've come to that conclusion. Correct. But actually, in the process of coming to that conclusion, you have now opened yourself up to influence, because you will now listen to people who also say that vaccines are not safe and that vaccines are not effective. And those people may be placing ideas in your mind which you're not considering in an objective way, because those people may be talking about Israel or may be talking about other things that are perhaps narratives that you might otherwise not accept. So actually, by the mere fact that you've come to that conclusion leaves you open to influence if you are not prepared to absolutely approach every piece of information that you come across with
Yes.
a certain degree of skepticism.
But that's a good point, though. Yeah, sorry, I jumped in there, but
you go ahead.
No, I'm just adding that we need to be able to compartmentalize the information that we're being given. And as you pointed out, if somebody says something that you like, but then they say something that you dislike, suddenly everything that they say now must be dismissed. It's 1 or 0 binary kind of thinking, whereas the complexity or the nuance means that you should be able to listen to each idea. And as Bruce Lee said, absorb what is useful, discard what is not.
But it goes beyond that because again, it goes beyond that because actually, if somebody okay, so on one hand, you're potentially open to influence if you listen to people that happen to agree with you on point A, that you may be influenced by point B. But equally, if you're a bit more discerning, it may be that you completely disagree with point B. But does that mean you should discount the points that are being made? No, because again, you got to also process information that you disagree with. And the problem that I have is that people that simply reject information that they disagree with, well, they're missing the point.
Yes.
They are actually quite manipulable, in my opinion, if they are not prepared to listen to things that they don't agree with and apply the same rigor to that as to the stuff that they do agree with, because it suggests to me that they don't apply any rigor to the stuff that they happen to agree with. So my point is here, we've got to be absolutely applying equal rigor to everything that we hear, because we should be constantly challenging our own precepts.
Yeah, but that right there, Mike, is why, to echo something we said a week ago or 2 weeks ago, is why people then just give up. Because it's just too much work.
Well, then we're going to lose the war. That's as simple as that. If people are constantly. I mean, we've had this conversation quite a few times on this program, but people are constantly saying, "What can I do?" That's what you need to do. That first and foremost is what you need to do. It's what we all need to be doing. We are our own worst enemies. I've said it before. I'll say it again. We're our own worst enemies, and the fight is with us. Yeah, but anyway, we've made that point before. So
yeah. I mean, just to beat that drum a bit more, I saw a comment under one of my recent shows. I think it was in the UK column forum or under YouTube. I can't remember where exactly. Someone says, "Oh, how can anybody?" say that about diet. Now, the guest, I think, wasn't really talking about diet. I think it was in passing. But now suddenly the entire conversation gets scrapped because of that one comment. And that kind of thing just drives me up the wall. It's this inability to go, okay, I don't agree with that comment, but I can agree with those comments there. And it's that kind of thing that just grates me, because you put in so much work to try and find the truth in something, or to try and find a nuanced view.
Yeah, but do you see how you've just been influenced? You have been influenced. So one person has come along and left a comment, and
yes.
You have been influenced by that, and you have no idea who that person is. That person could be a bot. That person could be a government employee. That person could just be an idiot. You don't know. There could be actually the person might have a point. You don't know who that person is, but you have just been influenced. So you have to, and we have to also recognize the power of a single negative comment and
Turn off the damn comments.
It can no, I don't think you should. But it can be an influential thing, and it can be, and a single negative comment can be much more influential than a single positive comment. It has to be said. So that is part of our role, is to keep the comments in perspective and keep our momentum up as well.
I think, as a rule, reading stuff that you don't instinctively agree with or go along with, or you don't feel you're aligned to it, I always think is a terribly useful thing to do, because it helps you to understand why people do think other things. And so therefore reading, particularly mainstream media, to read, I mean, I always find it, I would have said this before, but nowadays to read I don't really broadsheets as such, but to read a newspaper, to read a mainstream newspaper, I find it totally fascinating, because I really cannot believe the way in which stuff is being reported, the particular line that's taken on something, the bits that aren't sort of disclosed or fleshed out, or that are glossed over or whatever. And it's very, very valuable, because otherwise you make the mistake of thinking that if you do come to a different point of view on a particular issue with somebody, that you think you know why they've come to that point of view. And of course you don't. But once you start to understand the sorts of things that they've been exposed to, and therefore how it could have been reinforced somewhere that they have been looking or listening or whatever, then I think that's extremely helpful. And if you can get back to that point, effectively back to somewhere where there's a convergence rather than divergence, then you can start to build that discussion from a level that's no longer so contentious. So I think in finding out about the sorts of things that we may disagree with is very important. Also, of course, on comments. I mean, only a very, very, very tiny amount of people who watch or listen to something will end up commenting, and of those, there will be a high percentage of people intending to stir for one reason or another, and look how well it works. I mean, you know, it's a thing. It just does. I agree with you. I mean, it's a pity, and I think this is sort of the very unfortunate effect that the internet does have, or can have, or has had, in that if you were having this discussion around a table in a pub, it's not like somebody in, sort of 8,000 miles away could suddenly just lean in between you and just say, oh, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Because they're simply not there, and therefore they don't have that ability to sort of stir things up, cause that trouble or whatever it is, or just make people look the other way, or totally distract them, derail the conversation into another area. So that is massively regrettable, and I think that's all part of the learning experience of how to, like I say, how to read newspaper, but also how to read the internet. What are you actually doing when you're looking at it? Because sort of probably over 90% of it is complete and utter nonsense.
But, I mean, Mike, there's an interesting undercurrent in something you were talking about earlier when you mentioned me coming to a conclusion, or somebody coming to a conclusion. Now, I know that one of the strategies for, I think, the art of war, or was it the 48 laws of power or something, is to maintain a sense of liquidity in your position, so that you can always remain sort of psychologically powerful, right? So in other words, if you don't ever conclude something, or you don't have a fixed position on something, you can't really be attacked on it. But isn't that also, to some degree, a weak strategy? I mean, it's good to have conclusions about some things in life, surely.
Is it? I mean, are we all so certain in our position about what's right and what's wrong that our positions are unchangeable?
No. I'm not talking about unchangeable positions, but there are some, like principles, for example, tend to be generally unwavering.
Do they? I don't know the answer to that, Jerm, to be honest. I don't know the answer to that. Do I still live by the same principles that I lived by when I was a teenager? I don't think so.
But you might have principles now, though. I mean, you kind of know instinctively that taking a knife and just walking up to somebody and stabbing them is a pretty terrible idea for no reason. If it's in self-defense, then that's a different discussion. But in principle that just randomly stabbing people is not a good thing to do.
Yeah. True, but exactly, that's a really interesting example, because look at the incredible spectrum of views that you would kick up on at what point it does become acceptable to stab somebody, and straight away you're saying self-defense. Well, does it? I mean,
let me give you another example. There's like an old woman sitting on a train, and you're not just going to go and sit down next to her and swear at her for no reason whatsoever. If she's just minding her own business, reading a book. Now, there are some things that you are just wired to know.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but the point is that a principle will be expressed in slightly different ways by everybody. So the idea of being kind or being polite or whatever exactly the principle might be, will find itself challenged. I mean, let's take it, whatever any of these big issues are, whether it be Israel, for example. I mean, the way in which people have conflated the sort of feeling of not wanting to be anti-Semitic, and indeed, what possible case could there be for being anti-Semitic? I mean, it doesn't make sense to be anti-Semitic, but to conflate that with thinking that because Israel has a largely Jewish population, that therefore it follows that you would support the actions of the state of Israel is completely bizarre. And yet for some people that will be adhering to the principle that they're not going to be not just anti-Semitic, but that they're not going to discriminate on the grounds of race or religion, and that could express itself in support for destroying the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. So, I mean, it's hard to know where one does go with this. The COVID sort of theatre was exactly the same. People wanted to express their kindness and love for their fellow human beings in completely different ways. Some of them wanted to take injections and wear masks, and some of them absolutely vehemently objected to that. But the principle was the same. So, yeah, I mean, I suppose this is perennially sort of inconclusive, but I think you see my point with the knife or the old lady on the train. I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree with you, but everybody will have a slightly different take on it, just as everybody has a different take on any information they're presented with. But I think getting to that part, as I said earlier, of understanding, at least in the first instance, what the information is. I mean, why you might find with the sort of the self-defense thing or something, the reason that somebody's going to have a different approach from somebody else is because of their life experience, that they have seen, somebody express a particular whatever it is, or they know, or they, I mean, we can't sort of guess it. But the point is, there is always so much background that we cannot, in that snapshot moment, understand. And I think this is exactly what creeps into everything. The moment a news story comes out, everybody's response to it will be in some way slightly different based on their life experiences and their views of other things that sort of are associated.
Yeah, and just to add to what you're saying, I remember a few years ago. Sorry, just by the way, has your lighting changed, or am I seeing things?
No, you're not seeing things. A light has...
Somebody's just sat on the train next to our light and sworn at it.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, it's on my screen. Just to add to what you're saying, Charles, a few years ago, I was chatting to somebody on my show. Who was it now? I don't think it was Peter Bregan, actually. I think it might have been. And initially, I was so angry during, the early stages of the COVID era How could everybody just be blindly following all of this? Everybody's just wearing masks. They're all idiots. I think a lot of us said that. They look at all these morons. And I think it was Peter Bregan, who is an old psychiatrist. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's such a great man. He must be like almost 90 years old now. And he sat on my podcast and he said, hang on. Imagine you were on an airplane and let's say there's 180 people in that flight and they're all wearing a mask. He said, in this thought experiment, have you asked each one of them why they have a mask on? And I said, no. And he said, if you were to ask each one, in reality, each person would give you a different answer. They wouldn't give you the same answer. Some might say, I just need to get to the next city for a business meeting, so I'm just wearing the mask. Somebody else might say, I genuinely am scared of this virus, and so on. And that suddenly changed the way in which I saw people wearing masks, that there isn't an absolute or a conclusive reason like they're idiots. They might just be trying to get by, or whatever the reason might be. And that just kind of adds to what you're saying, is that each person does experience these things differently.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I mean, I think what would split people into broadly two camps there, and I think this is an interesting one, is whether people were doing it because they were simply complying with a directive and therefore they were just going to go along with it no matter what, or if they genuinely thought that there was a health benefit to doing so. And I think, you know, I find it terribly tragic that there were people who did think there was a health benefit to doing any of this stuff, but equally tragic as a reflection on our society is the probably bigger camp of people who knew perfectly well that there was no benefit to it if they'd stopped and thought about it for 5 seconds, because if there had been, why was this not done in the very first instance? But that they were just prepared to go along with it. And that is, you know, that is extremely disturbing. And one wonders, going back to, you know, whether it's a old lady on a train or not stabbing somebody. I mean, people's, you know, one really does have to question what exactly people's principles are, if that's what they are prepared to do. I mean, okay, mask wearing is but one example, but it was a very good one. It was a very good sort of test, because it specifically because there was an out for absolutely everybody. I mean, I know this differed by country, but in the United Kingdom, it was so very clear, written down in the, you know, the government guidance, that there was no requirement to do so, and no one could call you out on it, and no one could make you do it, and yet everybody went on with it. Now that demonstrates a number of things. It demonstrates that people were wanting to just be compliant and to demonstrate to others that they were being compliant, but also it demonstrated that absolutely hardly anybody bothered to just look. You know, if you're told to wear a mask and you think that sounds ridiculous, well, first of all, you could just say, get stuffed, I'm not going to do that. Or you might just think, well, okay, I wonder why they've said that, and I wonder what's written down about it. You just go and look. It's very easy to find. And yet, when you told people, I mean, this definitely been mentioned before, but when you did look at it, and even telling people, you know, the sort of cognitive dissonance of actually telling somebody precisely what government guidance said, and they were inclined not to react accordingly, which is basically just to take it off and know that there was no comeback at all. So very very instructive, but it does. That in itself gives, I think, a terrific insight into exactly the sorts of religions, to go back to the beginning, the sorts of religions that people want to belong to, because I mean, okay, you could say, like with religion in the faith sense, to step outside of the parameters of what that particular religion supposedly does or does not do is certainly personally uncomfortable, but professionally uncomfortable as well. And that seems to be where where a lot of this comes back to.
But if principles are not rooted in something cemented, then what is the purpose of having principles? I mean, principles in principle should be unwavering, not so?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree, but I think this is the point I'm trying to make, is that they can be, but it depends on the life experience of that particular person as to how that principle, how the adherence to that principle actually manifests. So culturally, either culturally or by experience, your idea of being such and such a thing, say you don't want to cause offence, you think that is a principle. Well, culturally, to how you deal with what we might describe as the truth will vary according to people's experiences and cultures, as in whether it's always the right thing to tell the truth and tell somebody what has happened, or whether you're protecting somebody in certain situations by not telling the truth, or by telling something different. So no, I think it's entirely possible to go through life adhering to the same principle, but if the information changes that in relation to that principle, then so does your behaviour. The principle doesn't change, but your behaviour might.
I'm reminded of Piers Morgan when he said, "My position changed when the science changed." He was referring to vaccines.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, that was a gigantic backside covering exercise, and I don't mean gigantic backside, but yeah, I think
he is a gigantic backside, isn't he?
Well, he did face Brett Lee in the nets, so he does get that. But I think, but what's wrong with that? I mean, if you realise that you have got something fundamentally wrong, well, how much of an ass do you have to be to not change your position? I mean, that is extreme bloody mindedness.
Yeah, you're talking about redemption.
Well, I don't know necessarily redemption, but I mean, let's take Israel. After 2 years of what's described as, well, I don't know how on earth the state of Israel is now describing this, but what has been going on in Gaza for the last 2 years, people who, and I totally understand it, on the face of it, the way it's presented by the mainstream media, sort of an indiscriminate slaughter of a number of Israelis. Yes, you can see that there was sympathy for some sort of a response. I mean, I use those words slightly reluctantly, actually, but nonetheless, you can see how there would be sympathy for that position. And I think it's amazing that after 2 years, there are still a large number of people who have not changed their position according to the information as it's being presented. That is extraordinary to me. But then equally, somebody listening to this who does hold that position might think that my position on something else, or indeed that, is extraordinary. So this is the trouble. We all have our own baggage and our own perspective. But the important thing to do is to keep reviewing that. And I fear, sadly, that we're not doing that reviewing process, and people like Tucker Carlson and Ben Shapiro and Nick Fuentes are, of course, towing along these large numbers of people who therefore are probably not going to be evaluating their own perspective simply for that reason, because their thoughts are sort of by proxy given to them by other people.
My views have changed on a lot of things over the years, and that's thanks to listening and considering, etc., etc. But I think what people worry about, Charles, is if your views just keep changing, it makes you appear wishy-washy. Like you don't stand for anything. Oh, no, you stand for something now, but next week you might stand for something else. And I think it's that type of weak integrity that I think some people are pushing back against, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And actually, I think that is exactly where politics becomes such a disgrace and such a muddle, because if you start with a lie, you are only ever going to get into more and more trouble. And so politicians or policy or legislation or anything that in its first inception is not done correctly or not done for the right reasons becomes incredibly problematic. And then when there's information presented that's very, very obviously to the contrary, and exactly like you say, to avoid the appearance of wishy-washiness, there is therefore a sort of doubling down. That is absolutely totally disastrous. But that is precisely what's happening. That's exactly what's happening with the Starmer regime. I mean, it's no different from any other one might say. But the number of issues that have been doubled down upon, or indeed that the lie has just been deepened and broadened in order to cover off the same issue is absolutely repellent. One can only hope that people are seeing through this in more ways than we're necessarily aware of. So I don't know. I mean, and actually going back to what might be described as sort of surprising result in the New York mayoral election, it does seem odd that would happen, but that in itself is telling us something about what people are thinking, which I think is very interesting. Okay, it was binary, isn't two candidates really, but still the fact that, notwithstanding what you're saying about Muslims being presented as the enemy, the fact that that's where the victory has gone is very interesting.
Did you see that the responses to that piece by, is it Miriam, on UK Column, when she wrote about Muslims are not the enemy, and it's
well, it was more than that. Is that not the enemy of Christianity, which was quite that was not just as open as just as not the enemy, the question of which is the closer religion between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, I think is one that most people haven't actually considered.
Yes. I mean, she was on my show and she made very similar comments, and the responses are predictable. That's the point that I was getting at. So, I mean, it's a tough nut to crack, Charles.
Yes, of course it is. It is very, very tough. But that is an absolutely brilliant one for people who really do need to just stop and think. First of all, they have to stop and think of what is their own direct experience. She has a I would say entirely valid. Of course, it's valid perspective from her. But frankly, if you live in a country like the United Kingdom, where you're being pressured by the mainstream media and now an awful lot of social media influences into thinking that almost all the problems that are besetting this country at the moment are the responsibility of Muslims, I think you've really got to wonder how on earth that's come to pass. I mean, can that really, really be the case, especially if you're going to consider calling the United Kingdom or England or whatever a Christian country? I mean, seriously, how does that work? Whereas if, and also, have you been to a predominantly Muslim country and encountered, as somebody who might look obviously, first of all, non-Muslim, but perhaps even being taken as a Christian, have you ever experienced any sort of hostility? I haven't, ever.
I haven't either.
In travel to a lot of countries with a very, very much majority Muslim population. In fact, I've only ever experienced totally the opposite, and totally the opposite to the way in which one might get expected to be treated in a city or a large town in the United Kingdom. So, it is a question of perspective.
Okay, on that note, Mike, Charles, catch up with you guys next week.